Hi, I'm Andrew.
And I'm Dave, and we're the IB English guys. And today we're going to look at a piece of student writing that's a paper one response to a piece of prose nonfiction. It's an extract from a memoir by Lori Lee called As I Walked Out One Midsummer Morning. And it's a great piece about independence, but that pull of home.
Yeah, so our preview for today is as follows. We're going to quickly summarize the text for those of you who did not watch the last video we're watching. And we're then going to unpack the criteria for paper one to make sure you remember these key aspects to focus on. We will then go over the student response, talk about the choices they made as a writer, and why we believe this paper scores a high mark.
Okay, so this extract again by Lori Lee was published in 1969, but it was describing an early experience he had as he was wrestling with the expectation to stay home and marry and do conventional things, and then that pull of freedom that he wants to, that desire for freedom to leave home.
Yeah, eventually Lee, who is our protagonist, he decides to embark on his journey by foot. He makes a decision to venture on off to see the ocean as well. During his journey though, Mr. Giles, he does feel lonely. He feels self-doubt. He's wondering if he made the right choice. How does the passage end, Mr. Giles?
Yeah, it's the realization that he's alone, that he's independent, but the trade-off, and again, that sort of that tension between his longing for freedom and independence, but again, that pull for home. And this is something that he's going to deal with. It has that uncertainty.
Okay, now that we've done the preview, Mr. Giles, I think it's important to unpack the criteria a little bit. These are things that the writer wants to keep in mind as they're thinking about the guiding question and crafting their response. Let's talk about criteria A, understanding and interpretation. What do we need to know, Giles?
Yeah, we want to have convincing and insightful interpretation, and we want to think about the implications and the subtleties, those sort of small details.
Yeah, you got to read between the lines. Also, you want to think about choosing references, and of course, these are well-chosen references. These are phrases and sentences that have impact and they matter to communicate meaning.
Yeah, nuggets.
Thinking about criterion B, which is?
Analysis and evaluation. With this particular criteria, we want to make sure we are, again, concise, convincing, and insightful analysis of the authorial choices.
Yeah, and of course, not only are you analyzing the authorial choices, but you're also evaluating them, which means you are judging them for their effectiveness. Did they succeed in helping the author communicate the purpose and the main objective of the text?
Criteria C is focus and organization. The word focus we've been emphasizing in many videos. We want to be focusing on the language of the guiding question. We'll talk about that question in a minute, but also that we're focusing on a strong idea that we're trying to convey.
Yeah, and once you have that strong idea, make sure you're organized. All your paragraphs should have that guiding question language in the topic sentence, and you want to keep your eye on that throughout the response, okay?
Yeah.
Criterion D, language.
Yeah, we want to think about grammatical accuracy. We want to think about good academic register and strong vocabulary.
Yeah, of course you want to have sentence variety. You might even consider implementing some rhetoric into your response to persuade the examiner, Giles or Cohen, that you do know what you're talking about.
Yeah, definitely. Give your paper some voice and have some fun.
All right, Giles, lastly, before we dive into the passage, what was the guiding question?
The guiding question reads as follows. How and to what effect is the tension between the pull of home and the desire for freedom created in this text?
Again, in the last video, which we want you to watch because the reading process is so critical, we highlighted the words tension, pull of home, and freedom. These are the three aspects we're going to focus on. What do you say we dive into the writing now and talk about what we like and perhaps what the writer could improve upon?
Yeah, that's great. So when I look at this introduction, I like the first sentence. The first sentence is establishing that tension, that desire to leave home, but also that how that's hard to do.
Yeah, and of course, because it's an introduction, once you've got that initial hook going, Mr. Giles, you need to put in the basics. You need the author's name, you need the genre, you need the text type, the year it was published. You need all of that information there, and probably a short summary of the passage too, just to show that you have understood it.
Yeah, I really like the phrase, the moving from a life that's planned and predictable to one that's open and unknown. I think that's a really astute observation, and it's critical to the piece, and I really like that a lot.
Yeah, of course, the introduction, as it should, ends with the thesis. We talked about this last video as well, but we like this sort of two-sentence thesis approach here, and we think that the writer is off and running. They've captured the guiding question, they're focused, and they're ready to show their knowledge. What's the first idea we see in the first body paragraph, Mr. Giles?
I see that the author, the writer, the student is deciding to go through the text and looking at the beginning of the text. And then we see that idea of monotony, predictability, and the sort of conventional expectations that the writer feels, that Lee feels in the text. That's a nice topic sentence to start the text.
Yeah, we encourage our students to ground deep and strong ideas in the topic sentence as opposed to literary features, and the student has done that. Of course, they're going to use the features, as you see the motif of time, pathetic fallacy, and so on and so forth, but they're using those features to support the idea from the topic sentence.
Yeah, speaking of pathetic fallacy, I think that's a really excellent, well-chosen reference, that small, tight valley stifling Lee's breath with its mossy mouth. That is, when I read the text the first time, that was the one phrase that I would make sure I talked about. Really well chosen reference and well explored too.
Another thing I would talk about would be that reference to the Iron Maiden. It's a footnote, and I can't tell you how many times I read papers, I'm sure you do as well, where it's clear the student has not read the footnote. Oftentimes there is critical information on these papers in the footnotes. Students, read the footnotes.
Again, this has got great interpretation when you look at that, great understanding and interpretation, and definitely great analysis of authorial choices. So I think off to a really good start. Next body paragraph, again, is a little bit shorter. I don't have anything wrong with that because I think that's that initial excitement of leaving home and that sort of embarking on the journey that the student is talking about, making reference to the boots and the stick as symbols of the journey.
Yeah.
I like that.
Perhaps to grow the paragraph a bit, maybe the writer could have done a bit more with the boots and the stick, just to kind of fill that paragraph out a bit. But again, there with that motif of time, we see the word freedom and home lit up as well, so we know that they're focused. Again, the paragraph is smaller, but they clearly are meeting all the requirements of the task as evidenced through the multicolor highlighting.
Yeah, I like the adventure and exhilaration of the journey. I think that's a part of that desire for freedom that's there. The next body paragraph is really, again, an excellent transition from the previous paragraph. Like I think that's really clever where we see that desire for freedom, but then despite those liberties, the pull of home is there. And again, that really captures the tension.
Students,
really nice.
that is a very clever thing that the writer has done there. They've taken the idea of freedom and they've used that as the final sentence of one paragraph, and then they've carried that forward to transition into the next paragraph as well in the topic sentence. I think that really links and unifies those ideas well.
Yeah, great organizational technique. And again, this paragraph is very rich to talk about the pull of home and how that's quite difficult. We see that sort of repetition of the word alone that's there, and again, the imagery and the voices that are calling him. And that's, again, all to show that tension that's in that writer's mind.
Perhaps one shortcoming of the paper might be that the writer has not focused on the word tension enough. I only see it a couple of times, but I think, Mr. Giles, this is written, in a time situation in the heat of battle. I think they did okay.
Yeah, no, I think that's really good. And again, when you look at the references, notice that they're nuggets. They're small pieces of text that are really well chosen and carefully chosen, but the writer is doing most of the heavy lifting here.
Students, you don't need long sentences as your references. I like what you said there. Choose the nugget. Choose just the phrase that you need, okay? We're moving on through the paper, and I think, towards the end, we really do see. What do we see here, Mr. Giles?
Yeah, well, we see that again. We see that condition and that desire for freedom is overpowering the pull of home, and I think that's part of that final paragraph.
Yeah, we see the personification of silence. That the silence was seemingly talking to Laurie Lee and guiding him on his pathway. I think that's very interesting. I really love the short syntax there. He's being guided, he's being encouraged, he's being motivated to go on in a very short, punchy, commanding way by the personification of time, is it?
Yeah, right. It's just telling him he needs to do that. And again, even though we also hear those sounds of home that are echoing in his head, I think that's really strong. Finally, we have a really well-developed conclusion. This surprised me that the student wrote so much in the conclusion.
Yeah, and again, we just see that good balance between the pink and the green. Again, really reinforcing that that dichotomy between the pull of home and the desire for freedom. And there is a bit of voice at the end too. So I think the student has done a really nice job and written quite a bit for that particular amount of time.
Yeah, and a nice idea is at the end when you're in your conclusion, this is where you can leave the text. You can go outside the text and think about, well, what's the takeaway takeaway from this text? What is this text telling me about what's universal about this? And then I think, again, it's just the idea of the universal idea of leaving home that we all need to do one day.
Yeah, quickly, folks, just zooming out and looking at the response as a whole, you can see just how well lit this paper is. This is a writer who's clearly a product of Mr. Giles and Mr. Cohen. They've got a wide range of textual references, a wide range of literary features, lots of orange, good focus on the question, clear language. Again, I don't know how many points it's worth, but I know it's some shade of 7.
Yeah, I think it's a strong paper, really strong understanding, and hopefully a good model for you guys as you're thinking about your own writing and what strategies you can use to produce a good piece of writing that you feel proud of.
Yeah. In closing, we hope this video, again, has provided some value for you. Continue watching these Paper One videos if that's a skill you're struggling with, and we really do think it'll help you make some great gains. Stay with us. Thanks for watching. Let us know what else you want to hear about, and we'll catch you next time. Bye, everybody.
Bye, guys.